Let's turn to one of the most provocative figures in modern psychoanalysis, Jacques Lacan, 1901 to 1981. Often described as the most controversial psychoanalyst since Freud, Lacan wasn't only a clinician. He was a philosopher critic whose ideas shaped post-structuralism, critical theory, feminist theory, film theory, and the wider 20th century intellectual landscape. Lacan's signature project was a return to Freud, but through structural linguistics. For him, the unconscious is structured like a language, and desire, always tethered to unconscious desire, is the central concern of analysis, to bring the analysant to the truth of their desire. This vision crystallized in Erich's 1966, his landmark collection of papers and lectures. He famously coined the name of the Father, signaling how law, language, and social order inscribed the subject. Fiercely critical of institutional orthodoxy, he was expelled from the International Psychoanalytical Association in 1959 and promptly founded a new psychoanalytic school as part of his renewed return to Freud. He pulled modern linguistics, philosophy, and poetics into psychoanalytic theory, arguing that language is a primary constituent of the unconscious. Known for unorthodox, sometimes eccentric clinical methods, Lacan delivered annual Paris seminars from 1953 until his death in 1981, refining key ideas such as the mirror stage, the infant's jubilant yet misrecognizing identification with its image, and the three registers of human reality: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. As Hoynes and Poot noted in 2004, Lacan's intellectual path unfolds in three phases: the imaginary 1936 to 1953, identification and the imago at the heart of psychic development; the symbolic 1953 to 1963, primacy of language, law, and social structures; the real 1963 to 1981, what resists symbolization, what cannot be fully said or represented. Lacan's legacy endures at the crossroads of clinical practice and cultural theory, a rigorous, unsettling invitation to think, desire, identity, and language anew. Let's now step into Jacques Lacan's three great registers: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real, each one a dimension of human experience, each shaping the way we see ourselves and the world. We begin with the imaginary order. Grounded in Lacan's famous mirror stage, this is the moment somewhere between 6 and 18 months when an infant first catches sight of its reflection and recognizes it as me. But here's the twist. This me is not the true self, it's an image. From that point on, the ego is built not from an inner essence, but from an external picture. That's why Lacan insists the ego is an illusion, a patchwork of images, identifications, and emotional projections. The imaginary loves wholeness, symmetry, coherence, but that coherence is always a trick of the mirror. It's a world of images, illusions, and misrecognitions, where our sense of self is shaped by what we see and by how others reflect us back. Now, the symbolic order. Here, we move into the realm of language, law, and culture, the structures that shape desire and subjectivity. Lacan's bold claim, "the unconscious is the discourse of the other," reminds us that even our deepest drives are expressed through the codes of language we inherit. The symbolic is where the name of the father operates a kind of paternal metaphor that enforces rules, introduces prohibition, and moves the child beyond the primal tie to the mother. In this order, desire is never just instinct. It's always mediated by social bonds and linguistic structures. The unattainable objet petit, the object cause of desire, lives here as well, always just out of reach, always producing that sense of lack. And later in Lacan's thinking, the syntome, a personal knot binding the imaginary, symbolic, and real, emerges as the unique way each person holds their world together. Finally, the real, Lacan's most elusive terrain, developed in his work from 1963 until his death in 1981. Do not confuse the real with reality. The real is what cannot be fully symbolized or imagined. It's outside the reach of images, outside the reach of language. We encounter it in trauma, in moments where the symbolic order breaks down and meaning collapses. It is the impossible kernel at the heart of experience, the thing that always returns to disrupt the neat patterns of our narratives. The real is at once the foundation of our existence and the constant reminder that some truths can never be put into words. So, imaginary, symbolic, real, three interwoven orders. One built from images and misrecognitions, one structured by the laws of language, and one forever beyond our grasp. Let's start with one of Lacan's most famous ideas, the mirror stage. Picture this. An infant, somewhere between 6 and 18 months old, is lifted up to a mirror. Suddenly, they recognize something, that's me. But here's where it gets interesting. In that moment, the child sees a coherent, whole image in the glass. Yet, in reality, their own body still feels clumsy, fragmented, uncoordinated. This sharp contrast creates both fascination and tension. Lacan calls this the birth of the ego, but it's a strange kind of birth, what he calls alienation. Why? Because the I is built not from some deep inner truth, but from an external image, an idealized version of oneself. From that day onward, the ego is bound to an illusion. The child falls in love with the wholeness of the mirror image, but that same wholeness also threatens their awareness of inner fragmentation. This creates what Lacan describes as an aggressive tension, a mix of desire, rivalry, and identification. The mirror stage becomes a permanent structure in what Lacan calls the imaginary order, the realm of images, identifications, and illusions. It is a prototype for every future conflict between how we see ourselves and how we actually live. Now, we move to another of Lacan's boldest concepts, the phallus. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, the phallus is not simply a physical organ. Instead, it is a signifier of lack, a symbolic placeholder for something that is always missing in the human psyche. It's a marker of desire, introduced most clearly in his essay, The Signification of the Phallus in Eckrets. Here's how it works in the symbolic order. Men are symbolically positioned as those who want to have the phallus, while women are positioned as those who want to be the phallus, the object of desire itself. This structure, Lacan argues, underlies the very way sexual identity and desire are organized in culture. But feminist theorists have not let this pass unchallenged. Judith Butler, in Gender Trouble, points out that both Freud and Lacan tend to keep the phallus too closely tied to the anatomical penis. Scholars like Avital Ronale, Jane Gallup, and Elizabeth Grosz have looked for ways to rework the phallus for feminist theory, detaching it from biological determinism. And Luz Irigaray takes an even more radical stance, arguing against the entire phallocentric model, proposing instead that gender be thought of as two positive poles, not one defined by the absence or possession of a single object. Even Jacques Derrida, in his playful yet sharp style, critiques Lacan's phallus by pairing it with the idea of the hymen in a kind of chiasmus, showing that the meaning of the phallus is never stable, always shifting, never quite the secure center Lacan imagined. So, whether in the mirror's reflection or in the symbolic drama of desire, Lacan's ideas keep circling around the same haunting truth. Our sense of self and our understanding of gender are built not on solid ground, but on structures of absence, misrecognition, and longing. Let's start with Lacan's idea of the trace, a concept he borrows from philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. For Levinas, the trace is the lingering imprint of the other, an ethical call that can never be fully grasped, always pointing beyond what is immediately present. Lacan takes this further, seeing the unconscious as carrying the trace of the other's discourse, an inscription in the symbolic order. It's not a memory you can recall, but a signifier of something lost or never fully possessed. This absence doesn't weaken us, it structures our desire, reminding us that our identity and meaning depend on the other's recognition. Now, what about standpoint theory and Lacan? While Lacan never proposed a formal theory of standpoint, there are surprising overlaps. Standpoint theory argues that our social location shaped by gender, race, class affects how we see the world. Those in marginalized positions often notice truths about social structures that the dominant miss. Lacan's framework, with its focus on language, the symbolic order, and the other, adds another layer showing how these positions also shape our unconscious identity. Take his castration complex, often read in light of patriarchy. It reveals how symbolic systems position men and women differently. In the same way, standpoint theory insists on amplifying marginalized voices, much like Lacan's emphasis on the subject's struggle for recognition. Together, they show us this. Identity is shaped not just by hidden drives, but also by where we stand in the social and linguistic map of the world.